retired to Owen Sound, Ontario, which is up there. And we inherited a house. And with the house, we inherited a very crabby old tabby cat who hated children. Now, I had, at that time, my granddaughter Jessica, who was 6 years old. And whenever Jessica came to visit, the cat would go shoosh under the bed, and that'd be the end of her. You wouldn't see her for the rest of the night or for the rest of the time that Jessica was there. Now, my husband decided that he was going to make this cat be friendly to Jessica. So I walked into my bedroom one day, and there's my husband, who's a very large man, on his hands and knees, with his head under the bed, going, "Here, kitty, 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 here, kitty, 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 come on out, kitty cat. Jessica loves cats." And standing beside him was my 6-year-old granddaughter, with an expression of disdain such as only a 6-year-old can have, and her arms crossed, and saying, "You can't rush a cat, Granddaddy." I've only had 3 Gibbons in my life, and this was one of them. I heard her say that, and I announced to all and sundry that dinner was going to be late that night, and I went into my office and I wrote, "You can't rush a cat." And it was fun. It's my only picture book, probably my last one, because the next 2 ones I wrote were rejected. But I wrote it, and I sent it to one of my editors, and she rejected it because it was too gentle. And I sent it to another of my editors, and she rejected it because it was too gentle. And then I sent it to Maggie DeVries at Orca, and she accepted it, and she said, "Oh, I love it, Carleen, it's so gentle." So there you go. The illustrator is Leslie Elizabeth Watts, and it's a wonderful example of why editors keep authors and illustrators apart unless they're these wonderfully talented people who can do both, because Leslie has illustrated this in a way that I could never have conceived of, and done an absolutely fabulous job. So, and the other funny part about it was that I live in Owen Sound. The publisher is in British Columbia, and when I saw some of the F and G's, the galleys of it, so I more or less knew what it was going to be. But it wasn't until I opened the back and read about the illustrator that I found she lived 40 minutes away from me in Paris. She didn't know, I didn't know, Orca didn't know. So Leslie and I shared our book launch, and it's been a lot of fun, and I hope people here will enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Book, My Home Day, and we were very honored and delighted to win the Mr. Christie Award for Under Prairie Sky this year. So this is our newest collaboration. When I was 10, I had to move, and I thought my world had come to an end. In a way it does for a child, because you leave your room, you leave your friends, you leave your school, and you leave that whole world that you have made your own. And I found it quite frightening. And it did work out, but I did make my mother make me a promise, and I made her promise me something that most 10-year-old girls are passionate about, and that was a horse. And of course, I thought, we were only moving a few miles away, but we were getting a much bigger backyard. I was sure a horse would eat all the grass in my new backyard. I didn't get a horse. I did get to go to horseback riding camp for 2 weeks. When my best friend moved from Vancouver to Nova Scotia some years ago, I went down to visit, and I wondered why they had moved and how it had all worked out. And I took Winnie, who was about 10 years old at the time, for a walk, and I asked her to tell me about her move. And she said, "I didn't want to move. I made my mother make me 3 promises." And I had a story bells go off in my head, because anytime something happens in 3s, for a story writer, it's magic. And I also thought Winnie was pretty smart to make her mother make 3 promises, and I only asked for 1. And the 3 promises were for a fiddle. She wanted to learn to play a fiddle when she moved to Nova Scotia. She wanted a beautiful new tree house, and she also wanted a horse. So of course, everything fit together for me to write this story. It was just a gift that landed in my lap. The only thing I had to fictionalize was the 3rd promise. Winnie does get a fiddle, Winnie does get a beautiful tree house, but she doesn't get a horse. And I won't tell you what she does get, you have to read the book. In real life, Winnie got a bunny, and I didn't think she should get a bunny. I thought she should get something a lot more magical than that, and she does. My other book is called The F Team, as Claire pointed out, and that stands for a lot of very fine, fabulous words, none of which are what Claire was alluding to. Children, and they all play hockey. They love hockey. And my three sons, when they were about 6 or 7, their dream was to make an A team. This story could be about hockey. This story could be about baseball, ballet, the school play, anything. It's about trying out for something you really want to be a part of, and it's tough. The A team in Toronto, or Mississauga, for those of you who don't know, this is the competitive level for hockey. My sons did not make the A team. They came home and cried, and we were told that they should learn to figure skate. So I took them figure skating lessons, and actually the NHL, they do the same thing. In order to become a better skater, figure skating is an excellent method to improve your skating. So my sons took figure skating, and lo and behold, a year or two later, when they tried out for an A team, they did make the A team. So that's where this story started from. It started from my sons and watching them learn figure skating. But this story is not written in prose. It's my first story that I've written in rhyme, and I had an awful lot of fun. It came to me in rhyme. The first page came to me. My friends and I loved hockey. We all shared a single dream, to shoot like stars across the ice and make our town a team. And these 6 kids go on to learn a lot of figure skating moves and challenge the A team. And I won't tell you who wins. You have to read the book. I would like to say I'm really delighted it's been nominated for the Blue Spruce Award, so I think kids will have a lot of F's for fun reading this book. Thank you.
My 3 minutes, and not only 2. The billy goat in There's a billy goat in the garden is not a cute and cuddly billy goat like this one. He is a stomping, tromping billy goat, a fighting billy goat, a dashing, crashing billy goat. Rhyming adjectives describing billy goat throughout the book. There's a billy goat in the garden. It's published by Barefoot Books. It is illustrated, I'm very pleased to say, by Claire Beaton, who is well known for her illustrations using felt and other fabrics. A whole bunch of barnyard beasts stomp and tromp their way through the story, trying to get the goat from the garden, but of course, the stubborn little billy goat will not come out. The repetition invites participation, and you don't have to be a child to do this. There's a billy goat in the garden, and he will not come out. I'll chase that goat, said Rooster. He flip-flops all about, but the huffy, rough old billy goat will not come out. There's a billy goat in the garden, and he will not come out. I'm bigger, barks the pig. He yip-yaps all about, but that huffy, naughty billy goat will not come out. There's a billy goat in the garden, and he will not come out. I'm bigger, grunts the pig. He snorts all about, but that biting billy goat will not come out. There's a billy goat in the garden, and he will not come out. I'm bigger, praise the donkey. He flip-flops all about, of course, that dancing, prancing billy goat will not come out. And of course there's more animals, all trying to get the goat out. The billy goat will not come out until the very smallest of all comes along. See what happens.
When I was about 10 years of age, that'd be about 1950, there was a story published in Good Housekeeping magazine by the American writer Paul Gallico. It was not called The Small Miracle at that time, it had a different title. But about 10 years later, it was made into a motion picture. And then in the 70s, it was published with the story that perhaps Gallico is most famous for, The Snow Goose. If ever I say his name in The Snow Goose, people remember that. They don't always remember The Small Miracle. So I thought it would be really interesting to see if this story might make it in another reincarnation, this time as a picture book. Now, Mrs. Gallico had to give permission. Mrs. Gallico is 96 years of age. She lives in the south of France. And she thought it would be an interesting idea if her husband's story were to have another chance in another form. The only thing was, she had to have authority to approve of the manuscript. Talk about pressure. And halfway into it, her sons, whom I think were not on good terms with her, decided that they had to get in on the act too. So after stick handling through several sets of lawyers and the family, we managed to get the book. It's the story of an orphan child, Peppino, whose only friend in the world and his companion is a donkey, Violetta. And what makes Violetta special is that she appears to have a smile on her face. Now, you know, don't you, that when you have a story about a boy and a donkey, something has to happen to the donkey, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what happens. The donkey gets sick. And because Peppino lives in the mountain town of Assisi, where St. Francis is buried in the crypt there, he, on the advice of his priest, decides that he will try to take his donkey into the crypt. And perhaps if St. Francis sees the donkey smile, he might help him to get better. Well, of course, things aren't that easy in life, are they? And eventually, Peppino realizes that only the Pope can give him permission to take the donkey. This is a child who will not take no for an answer, and eventually makes his way to the Vatican, and through very clever and charming means gets right into the office of the Pope, where he learns a very valuable lesson, a lesson that caught me very deeply, and I think any child who is facing the death of a pet, this is a story that has, I think, some valuable things to say to them. I want to comment just on the art for a moment. Carolyn Kroll did the illustration. She's done a magnificent job. The colors of Tuscany are there. And she has also studied the work of 17th century Italian painters. Many of the paintings are tableau-like, and architecture features on almost every page. End of that book. Right from the beginning, Raven thought that he was better than any of the humans or the animals on his island. And he would strut about with his chest puffed out, and he was always lecturing people. He was always saying things like, "You better pay attention to what I have to say. I know things that you will never know." Fortunately, all of the humans and the animals ignored him. Silly old bird, they would say. Well, one day, when Raven wasn't getting the kind of attention that he thought he deserved, he flew into a tantrum, and he announced to everyone, "I'm leaving this island, I'm going to the mainland to make a name for myself." And he packed a bag of frozen fish, and he took off into the teeth of a sleet storm. Now the winds battered and buffeted him, and the ice pellets pounded his feathers, and Raven flew round and round and round in circles. Before long, he didn't know where the sky ended and the sea began. And it wasn't until a wave of the sea almost smacked him in the head that he realized that he was plunging into the icy waters of the ocean. He pulled his feet up sharply. He thrashed his wings violently. He looked around for a place to land. Suddenly, he saw a shape looming out of the water. "Ha ha!" he cried, "a rock!" And he hurled himself at it. And then seconds later, he was plunged into absolute darkness. You see, Raven had thrown into the mouth of a bow-headed whale. That is one of the stories from The Bear Says North, 10 tales from northern lands. And in particular, the story of Raven is, I think, one of the most unusual of the Raven stories. It is so much, in many respects, like Pinocchio, like Jonah, and many of these stories are ones that have not appeared in print for a long, long time. And I hope to, once again, breathe life into some stories that a new generation could enjoy. So that's The Bear Says North, illustrated by Toronto's Julia Martin, who has done wonderful oil pastel pieces for the book.
I was referring to exhibitionism, but nobody gets me. When I take my books of poems and my rhyming storybooks around to schools, because I visit schools a lot, the question that I get asked most by kids is, how do you get the covers so shiny? The second most asked question is, where do you get your ideas? And of course, what I always say to the kids, the same place as you get yours. They're going on in your head all the time. And it's not about where, it's about how to catch them, how to harvest them. And a lot of kids think that you can only get your ideas, and a lot of grown-ups think this too, when you're doing brilliant. So I wanted to write a book about ideas that come to you when you're not feeling brilliant. And the way you're supposed to pronounce this is, if you can do the cabbage head. So, very good. And I talk a lot about ideas in this, and I got very, very silly here. Here's a pothead. So please do this with me. I need a brain that's brilliant.
I need a brain that's brilliant.
I need a head that hums.
I need a head that hums.
I need a head that's ready when a good idea comes.
I need a head that's ready when a good idea comes.
Sometimes I'm a cabbage head.
Sometimes I'm a cabbage head.
Sometimes I'm a star.
Sometimes I'm a star.
Always I'm amazed by where my best ideas are.
Always I'm amazed by where my best ideas are.
And so I wrote a lot of poems about ideas, and which is a great topic because you can do almost anything. And I'll read you this one. I need an idea, need it fast, need a good one that'll last. Need it here, need it now, need it fizzy, need it wow. Need a full of buzz idea, need a best there was idea. Your idea, come idea, let me hear you hum idea. Wouldn't it be nice if when you needed an idea you could just do that? Come on. And of course, one of the ways that you get your ideas all the time is that they do jump into your head. And the third question I get asked most at schools is, when ideas jump into your head, does it hurt? And I would like to read this poem to you. It's about what happens to many of us when we get ideas at inconvenient times. Go away poem. Go away poem, it's the middle of the night. One good clue is there isn't any light. Look, I'm in pajamas and I haven't got a pen, and my notebook's in my backpack and it's somewhere in the den. Go away poem, I'm supposed to be asleep. Something that's impossible if you decide to keep running all around my head, dancing on my brain, sounding more and more excited as you make up each refrain. Okay, poem, I'll get up and write you down. Here's a pencil, find some paper, trying not to make a sound. But if I'm getting out of bed and turning on the light, you better sound as good tomorrow morning as tonight.
As an illustrator, Lily Smith's manuscript of Story for Sir Cassie University was a wonderful launching pad of my imagination. In this little book, I got to cross that fuzzy boundary between fantasy and reality. Cassie read a story about knights. An evil knight grabbed Lady Veronica. He locked her up in a castle. Sir Thomas rode to the rescue. He slew the evil knight and freed Lady Veronica. Oh, thank you, cried Lady Veronica. You are a true brave knight. Cassie closed the book. She thought for a minute. Then she went to find Trevor. Let's play knights, Cassie said. What do knights do? Trevor asked. They live in castles, ride horses, and rescue damsels in distress. All right, Trevor said. And so they do play knights, building bigger and bigger castles with deeper and wider moats. The entire family becomes involved in the fun, including baby Amanda, Towser the dog, and Mother. Also included in the story are a number of successfully resolved disagreements about which roles everyone is to play. Cassie is very skilled at keeping Trevor in the game, even when he refuses to be the damsel in distress, or to die when he becomes a dragon. Each time Trevor declares, "Then I won't play," Cassie comes up with an acceptable solution to the problem. Finally, Mother, the queen, announces it's time for a feast, or lunch, and time to clean up the kingdom. Building castles and playing knights along with the characters was great fun for me. I hope you will open the covers of Cassie to the rescue and have a wonderful time, very much as Cassie did with her book of notes. And when she and Trevor had finished cleaning up, Cassie thought for a minute. Then she picked up her book about the castles. Here's a little introduction to what the characters look like. This is Trevor and Cassie having their first argument. Here's Sir Cassie as she makes her announcement, and the dog Towser. Here's Sir Cassie riding off to battle, and there's baby Amanda who eventually becomes the damsel in distress. And on the other side we have our characters crossing into fantasy world, where their whole playroom becomes a castle, and the mother becomes a queen, and they have their first big argument.
I have a tendency to look into my own life and take a little part of it and write a book. Sometimes I wondered, I was telling someone at dinner tonight, what if I run out of memories? Will I run out of stories? Well, this book that I'm sharing today, it has an interesting history, and it starts with where I grew up, which was New York, if you can tell by my accent. If I say coffee, it's a dead giveaway. And I lived on Audubon Avenue on 176th Street in Manhattan, and I lived next door to Norman and Felice. Norman was a year older than me, and Felice was a couple of years younger than me. Norman had a lot of good qualities. He was a wonderful artist, and he helped me do my posters because I wasn't great. But he had some mixed qualities too. He turned the light out on Felice, climbed into the closet, and scared the life out of her. He dared me to jump from the couch to see who could jump further. I won. I jumped into the glass coffee table. And Norman loved scary movies. And I agreed to go along to see many of them with him. And while I was in the movie theater, the movies were fine. I wasn't particularly scared. It was daytime. I walked out. I was fine. But that night, they all came to my window. Every single monster. The Fly. I don't know if anybody remembers The Fly. That was one movie that made me not go into a telephone booth for a long time. You go in there, and you're you, and then you become a fly. It all came to my window. Okay, I still went to another movie with Norman. I went through the ordeal again. And then one day I realized this was too painful. I had to make a choice. What was I going to do? I knew Norman wasn't an easygoing guy about these things. What would he say if I told him I'm not going to those movies again? Well, it was just, the nightmares were too awful, so I decided to tell him. And Norman was not nice about it. He called me a scaredy cat. He said, oh, you just can't take it, and on and on and on. So I remembered this. And one day, in thinking about a story, I decided to write the story of Norman and me. Except the wonderful thing about writing a story is you can change stuff. Norman, wherever he is now, has become much nicer. The story is called Nothing Scares Us, and it's about two best friends who do everything together. They fight pirates in the playroom, they get rid of aliens, they throw alligators into the garbage. They do everything together, and then they go to the movies. And actually, they watch some of these things on TV. And the boy, Lenny, is quite thrilled, while the girl is quite miserable. But because girls are really brave, there is another part to the story, which is when they're enjoying popcorn at the movie, a little spider shows up. This isn't such a little spider, but he's quite wonderful. And he's been everywhere. And Lenny is freaked out about the spider, jumps up on the couch, and Lucy very bravely picks him up and tosses him out the window. In the end, it's really about fear, and one person's fear is not another person's fear, and I actually am very good about spiders, especially plastic spiders. And in the end of this story, both kids say, nothing scares us, no one scares us, we are the fearless too. And I've decided to live my life like that. Nothing scares me, no one scares me. I'm fearless, but I have to admit, I still hate scary movies.
Recently, my sister Ann and I researched a book on the boreal forest. The boreal forest, for those of you who don't like trees and grass and woods, is located north of the deciduous forest where we live and south of Tundra. In fact, it takes up more than half of Canada and it circles the whole world. And Ann and I thought that this was a pretty cool place. And we're going to share with you some of the ideas in a very brief amount of time. The ideas that we got for our book from the travels that we had in the boreal forest.
The boreal forest is all about trees. Mostly coniferous. Fruit. Like all plants, as trees grow, they add oxygen to the air. And because the boreal forest is the biggest forest left in the world, some people call it the lungs of the earth.
If you want to stay dry in the boreal, you better dress accordingly. Some people call the boreal a giant wetland. And because it's all wet up there, it's a wonderful breeding ground for insects. So if you're going to travel there, especially in June and July, and you want to return in one piece, don't forget your bug juice.
The northern wetlands are a giant nursery for billions of birds in Canada, including almost half of the ducks that are born here.
Insects, trees, animals, and birds all use the boreal forest, and we use it too. We make paper products. A lot of them are recycled from boreal trees. We gather mushrooms and berries, and we have beautiful instruments that are made from the trees that grow up there, especially white spruce is used for guitars and ukuleles and that type of thing.
Winter lasts more than half the year in the boreal forest, and the first people who lived there were the people who invented the snowshoe, because the snow is so deep and fluffy that they needed the snowshoe to flow over.
One of the things that Ann and I like best about the boreal forest is that it's a land of stories. Some stories take the form of imagination and wild characters, and they're contributed to such books as The Lord of the Rings. Northern peoples passed the long, long nights up there sharing stories and folk tales about Norwegian trolls and nipkins and ravens and other things like Bob was talking about earlier. But many of the stories come from respect for the wild and the remarkable people and animals that live there.
Coolwood has a story about a Siberian boy who boasted that he wasn't afraid of tigers until he came face to face
that remain wild and healthy today. Large numbers of animals and plants survive there, and people still live with the forest as their ancestors did. It is a place where old stories are told and new stories are born.
Our book is kind of an attempt to get us focused on the forest and thinking about protecting it, getting kids to turn to their parents and say, what are you doing about the boreal forest?
Besides staying indoors.
Actually, I gave Claire permission to unleash her wit on me because I thought I was the only one without an award here. But she'd be more than kind to me. Thank you, Claire. You can start now.
There's 700 that didn't win.
Yes. There is a saying in New Guinea, our forests are a gift from our ancestors, which must be passed on to our children. Today I bring to you a forest of stories. These stories are about 7 unique trees that grow in different parts of the world. Their species range from the great cypress that grows in China to the majestic kapok, which towers above all trees in the rainforests of Guatemala, to the valuable chestnut of Japan, to the exotic cherry blossom of India, to the amazing palm of Nigeria, which has a mind-blowing 1,000 uses, to my favorite pomegranate tree of Morocco. Now, trees are the oldest living things on earth. They were here long before man appeared on this planet. They are, in a sense, our living ancestors. So like our ancestors, they are worthy of our respect. But they are also here with us now. We have a close relationship with them, an unfair alliance in which we accept a multitude of gifts from them and offer nothing in return. There are so many things they can be. Trees are home for insects, birds, and animals. Their fruit feeds us, their leaves and branches sing to us, and their wood warms us and houses us. And of course, we depend on trees for our very lives. For what they breathe out, we breathe in. So as our contemporaries, they have a right to coexist in harmony with us. And trees are also like the children. They will still be here when we are long gone. So like the children, they deserve a love. So what I bring to this book and the book world is my fascination with other cultures, a passion for poetry, and respect for things that are spiritual. In these stories, I have tried to capture the spirit of other cultures, and Helen Can, the illustrator, has splendidly rendered the details in vibrant watercolors. So together we hope to inspire the children to search further and encourage acceptance of other traditions. But I must caution you, there is nothing traditional about this forest. I'd like you to imagine a forest with a tree that would plant ideas in your head, or a haunted tree that would trap you by turning your flesh into wood, or a tree that becomes your best friend and shares secrets with you, or a healing tree that can cure blindness, or even a silly one that can take you for a ride, dancing all the way to the marketplace, or a tree that lends you its magical branches so you can escape an evil witch who has captured you and your friends. So to the children, I hope they feel the magic as they journey through this forest. And to everyone else, please buy this forest upstairs and pass it on to the children, because they are the caretakers of tomorrow. Thank
you. And I also wrote for a television series called Are You Afraid of the Dark, which some young students might be aware of. And I learned to love writing scary stories when I was writing for that series. So when I had the opportunity to write a book, I decided to go with a scary story as well. And it's called The Mysterious Mummer. And I had the cover blown up so that you could just see it a little bit better. And the two important things on here are a lighthouse and mummers. This is one of the mummers. This is the mysterious mummer. Now, mummer is a word that a lot of people aren't familiar with. And it comes from the word mum, which means to be silent. Now, mummers, they come dressed in disguises, just like Halloween trick-or-treaters would come to your door in costumes. Mummers will come to your door, also in disguise, but not from Walmart or Zellers. They will come with homemade costumes, and their heads are always covered completely, not just like a mask at the front, but their whole heads would be covered. And when they come to your house, not at Halloween, but on the 12 days after Christmas, on any one of those nights, you just might hear a knock at your door, and the mummers might be there. Some of them come with instruments like fiddles or accordions, mouth organs, and they've come to have a party. And a friend of mine sent me this photo from Newfoundland, and it has two mummers on it. You can see that their head covering is like a pillow or a sheet, not a mask, but something much more mysterious. Can't see anything at all. And when they're playing, partying in your home, you can guess who they are. And if you guess correctly, they must remove their head covering and show their faces. But if you don't guess correctly, they just finish playing and they move on to another house and go and party there. You'll never know who is in your home. So the mysterious mummer is the story of a 13-year-old boy named Joey McDermott, and he's a couch potato, and he thinks on his Christmas holidays he's going to just kick back and watch a lot of television, but his mom gets sent to the hospital. She has a freak accident. There's no one to look after him, so he gets sent to a small town in Newfoundland called Monk's Cove, and that's where his lonely aunt lives. And she lives on the very, very edge of a cliff. In fact, if you look through her living room window, you would see no land at all, just water. And when Joey arrives, he finds that his once loving and beautiful, caring aunt is now sick. She looks awful. She's cruel to him. And she's acting in a very strange way. During the day, she'll either be yelling at him or locked in her room. And at night, she sneaks out and she goes to a lighthouse. And one night, Joey follows her there and he sneaks in to see what's going on. And while he's there, he sees that his aunt makes a wish. And the wish is made at 11:11, which is called the magic moment. It's the only time when the clock has all the numbers aligned. They're all exactly the same number, 1111. And they say if you make a wish at 11:11, it will come true. And her wish is that she wants to contact her dead husband. Once she makes that wish, a door to the supernatural world opens up, and Joey is sucked into that world of ghosts and restless spirits and mysterious mummers. Thank you.
They were my husband's snakes, my husband's rats. My husband's happy ass rats.
Oh, I see.
Anyway, okay.
That clears everything up, doesn't it?
When I was a child, I was born in Texas and I grew up there, and I hadn't really heard of Emily Carr. But I moved to Canada, I moved to Guelph, and about 25 years ago became friends with Jean Little. Jean Little is crazy about Emily Carr. She has great love and respect for her. And so Jean, being a friend and mentor, she was often telling me stories about hundreds and thousands, all these little things from Emily Carr stories. And also how much she had been inspired by the fact that Emily Carr sort of made a blossoming of her career in her later years. Like around 57, she actually threw herself with great energy into her career after a long sort of dormant period when her work hadn't been selling very well. And Jean felt that that was very inspiring, that at that age you would jump back in and do some of the best work of your life. Anyway, so years ago, I took my mother to Victoria, and we went to the Emily Carr Gallery. We went to the Victoria Gallery, saw Emily Carr's work. We went to her house. It was quite wonderful to be there with my mother, actually. And I bought a poster of Big Raven and had it mounted on, laminated sort of, and hung it above my bed. So, I became quite a loyal fan of Emily Carr's work. So when the phone rang one day, a couple of years ago, and it was a Tundra editor saying, "We would like you to do a biography of Emily Carr," I was stunned, stunned that I hadn't thought of it myself, being such a fan, stunned that this amazing gift had come to me. I'm actually a really lucky person. I have a lot of really good things happening to me. And another lucky thing was that the book had actually been suggested by Maxwell Newhouse, an illustrator from Cultus Lake, British Columbia, who is also extremely fond of, if not totally in love with, Emily Carr. So the two of us came together like that, two people devoted to her work, which is a very, very fine way to do a book, to have two people who didn't just stumble onto it, but who really care about it. So here is the book, Emily Carr at the Edge of the World. It's built along the same sort of pattern that was used in my first artist biography of Maud Lewis, Catherine Joy, which is that the book includes text, which I crammed as many of the details of her incredibly fascinating life in as I could. They made me cut the part out about how she had to have a big toe amputated while she was in England. I thought that was very, very amazing, and I'm going to tell it to every audience. It made walking really hard. So all those trips into the native villages to paint, they were all that much harder because her foot wasn't really quite right. Anyway, we have the life story in the text. We have Maxwell's wonderful pen and ink drawings. They're quite quirky. I've had a lot of people come up and say, I really like those drawings. He did them over and over and over. He was just compulsive about it. We put it, I chose 16 works by Emily Carr to include. I tried to take some of the ones that are quite well known, yes. Well, here, I particularly like this one of her little monkey, Woo, her pet monkey, Woo. She was a great animal lover, and of course I relate because of that. I included Big Raven, one of the very famous ones, but also some of the joy of being the one who puts the book together is that I got to include a picture that I found on the internet. I've only seen it in books in black and white, but on the internet it was in color. This is called My Bed Somewhere in France. Who would ever guess that Emily Carr had done an interior with so much blue, and there are her two little parrots. She almost always had birds. She found that it helped her break the ice with strangers. She was actually quite shy. So this is the story of her struggle to become an artist in a time that was not really friendly to women artists. How hard she studied, how hard she worked, how she came back from depression, basically, and illness, to become a superstar painter. And she was also an extraordinary writer whose first work, Flea Wit, won the Governor General's Award. At the time she died, her spirit was still amazingly strong. She could have painted for another 50 years, but of course her body, sort of gave out. That's the story of life, but she would have kept on painting. She felt like she was still in there, loving her work and loving the trees. And I will just mention, day after tomorrow, the 13th of December, is her birthday. So mark it on your calendar, and every year remember to say, happy birthday, Emily Carr.
Theoretically, I might be able to live in 1850, but practically I really wouldn't want to because I know too much about the difficulties. I'm going to talk about A Pioneer Christmas, which is the third book that I've written about the Robertson family, pioneers living in the backwoods of Upper Canada in 1840. Illustrated by Heather Collins' wonderful pencil illustrations. She illustrated all three of the Pioneer books as well as two others of my books. And it's always a pleasure to have Heather's illustrations in those books. This is the story of the Robertson family getting ready for Christmas as it was back in the 1840s, a much simpler type of Christmas than we have, but they did have some interesting traditions, some of which we've lost. So as the story opens, 10-year-old Sarah and Granny sit making pomanders. And as they're making them, they're talking about the arrival of visitors from afar, Cousin Andrew and his expectant wife, Sophie, who are lost at the moment somewhere in a blizzard. 4-year-old Lizzie interrupts them with an important question. Aren't we going to make plum pudding? Lizzie asked. You promised we could. Ma smiled at the little girl. Yes, Lizzie, I did promise. Why don't you fetch me the bag of raisins? We'll start now. Plum pudding, Lizzie announced in a loud voice, and every head turned. If Ma was ready to make the pudding, then Christmas really was coming. An excited bustle filled the room. Meg chopped suet, Granny and Lizzie sorted through the currants, making a pile of the best ones. Sarah tipped the raisins onto the table. She had just begun to tease out seeds with the point of a knife when a small hand tugged at her apron. Sweet, little Tommy begged. With a quick glance at her mother, Sarah popped a raisin into the little boy's open mouth. Ma was too busy tasting the batter to notice. Not quite spicy enough, she decided. I'll grate up a little more nutmeg. Tommy plumped himself on the floor under the table to march his potato anvils up and down, and Sarah slipped into a daydream about the letter that they'd had from Nova Scotia. All her life, she'd heard about the East Coast relative,
time to add everything else. Lizzie poured in the currants, Sarah dumped in her raisins, and Meg tipped in the shredded suet. Stir up time, Willie shouted, and threw down the rag he'd been using to polish the sleigh bells. Me first? You know the rule. Meg scooped Tommy up onto a chair, youngest first. She held the little boy's hands around the spoon. East to west, she chanted, just like the wise men going to Bethlehem. Now make a wish. More raisins. You don't say it out loud, silly, Willie hooted. You'll never get your wish now. Tommy burst into tears, and Lizzie pushed in. My turn. The batter was too stiff for her, and Ma had to help. Lizzie scrunched up her eyes. I'm wishing, she announced. Well, don't take all day. Willie made a grab for the spoon. What will I wish for, Sarah wondered. She had planned on wishing for a silver thimble, but ever since the letter had arrived, she'd been dithering. Wishing really did work sometimes. The year she'd wished for a pink hair ribbon, her wish had come true. So this time she wouldn't waste it on anything silly. This time she had something important to wish for. When it was her turn, Sarah closed her hands around the wooden handle of the spoon. East to west, must do it right. The batter was so thick she had to push hard. But I can't ask for help. Doing it alone is part of the magic. Once around, twice around. As she started into the third turn, she pressed her lips together. Not a hint of her wish must escape. Please, she thought, concentrating on the raisins and currants folding in and out of the batter. Please let Cousin Andrew and Sophie get here safely, and please let the baby be born in time for Christmas. There, she'd done it. Finally, when they'd all had a stir, Maud dropped in a silver coin. We'll see who's the lucky one this year, she said. Then it was time to tie up the pudding in a linen bag and hang it in a pot of boiling water, where it bubbled and steamed, filling the house with succulent smells. When I read in my research about the tradition of stir-up Sunday, which came from the Book of Common Prayer, when people sat in church the first day of Advent, they were told the prayer was, "Stir up our hearts, O Lord." And because it was also the time of year when they made the Christmas pudding, that Sunday became known as Stir-up Sunday, and many families made their Christmas pudding that particular day, and they had these traditions about everybody in the family getting to stir and make a wish. And I thought, I have to work that into my story. And this is quite often the way historical stories go together. You find a little nugget in your research, and it gives you a scene in your story. A pioneer.
And I decided that I really should have added one more word there. Tot age, teenage, dope-age. The Mary Claire stories, which are part of Penguin's Our Canadian Girl series, are set in the city of Montreal in the year 1885. The reason that particular year is because it was the year when a very serious smallpox epidemic came to the city. The last time smallpox came to Montreal in such a big way. In book one of the Mary Claire sort of mini-series within the bigger series, the disease has just come to the city, and so it's not at the real forefront of the story. In Dark Spring, the story centers really more on the effect on Mary Claire's family of an accident that her papa is involved with at work, and just the implications of a family in the 19th century if the primary wage earner is not able to earn that wage. In book two, A Season of Sorrow, smallpox is spreading quite a bit more, and it does come to affect Mary Claire's family in a very big way. And of course, I realized as I was working on the stories that at some point in the series, Mary Claire herself, if there's this epidemic, would have to get smallpox. Well, 1 in 4 people who got the disease died of it. But I knew that Penguin wanted the series to go on to 4 stories, so I thought Mary Claire had better not be one of them. And so it does go on to book 3. There were a lot of serious things to deal with in the first 2 books, and so I thought I'd better lighten things up a little bit for book 3. And so the biggest problem in Mary Claire's life at the beginning of book 3 is these annoying visitors at her house. Now, she's brought this upon herself. She invited them to stay toward the end of book 2, a family whose house had burnt down. And she's quite annoyed with them. Well, that plus all of the things that have gone on in the earlier part of the year, I mean, she's got a lot on her mind. So she's daydreaming in the square, and she turns to head home, not paying attention, and doesn't notice the runaway horse coming down the road, almost runs her down. She slips and she falls. People are talking to her, trying to get her to tell them where she lives, but she's quite confused. She wanted to tell the strangers staring at her to please just take her home, but everything was swimming. She could not make the words come. Again, she sank toward the ground. This time, someone was behind her, and she sagged into his arms. When Mary Claire regained consciousness, she felt herself being jostled as if in a carriage. Clip-clop, clip-clop, clip-clop. She opened her eyes. She was in a carriage and wrapped in fur. She must be dreaming. But her head would not throb so in a dream. In a dream, her wrist would not send pain shooting up her arm and down her fingers. Surely, John, we can get our own doctor to tend to her. And in what kind of dream would she be lying with her head in the lap of an English-speaking woman? Mary Claire shifted a little so she could see the Englishwoman's face. It did not look unkind, even though on the side of her fur hat was the little snout of some animal. Mary Claire felt the carriage slow and turn a corner. She felt its angle change. They were heading up a hill. Please, madame, Mary Claire managed to whisper. No hospital? We are taking you home, the woman said. Isn't that right, John? The man with the reins answered, yes, Winifred. Slowly, Mary Claire sat up. Outside the carriage, the street was wide and lined with trees. This was not the way home. Nous n'allons pas dans la bonne direction, tournez-vous. The woman named Winifred laughed. I don't understand a word you're saying, dear, but are you feeling at all better? Our doctor will come and tend to your injuries, but I do think a little color is returning to your cheeks. Doctor? A doctor would cost money. She had to get home. She had wasted too much time already, daydreaming at the square. And if her daydreaming were to cost her parents money too, oh, how very cross Mama would be. And so Mary Claire is herself about to become a visitor, and Mary Claire Book 3, Visitors.
Fascinated by dinosaurs and creatures that lived long ago. Her grandpa, who is an amateur paleontologist, has made some great finds, and so has her older brother and sister. So Josie dreams of making a fabulous find herself. Tiny bones have been found in the rocks near Grandpa's cottage, but what are they from? Josie decides to find out, and so she goes exploring. And one day, behind some slimy rocks on the beach, she makes an amazing discovery. Josie crouched to examine the small cave-like crevice. Suddenly, her hand slipped, and she found herself wrist-deep in icy water. By her feet was a small tidal pool. Pieces of broken rock were scattered over the bottom of the pool. Her eyes were drawn to one of them. She scooped it out. What she saw made her gasp in amazed delight. Josie believes that this is the fabulous find she's been hoping for. But is she right? She decides to keep her find a secret until she knows for sure. But keeping it a secret is easier said than done. Lucan, the boy who lives in the cottage next door, has been spying He suspects that she's found something really good, and he will stop at nothing to take it away from her. So one day, when Josie goes back to do some more exploring behind the slimy rocks, Lupin follows her. Josie sees him coming, and she quickly hides, and then Josie pushed back quickly. Then it happened. Her left foot jammed. She tried to yank her leg forward, but it wouldn't move. Her foot was firmly caught in the crevice. She wiggled back and forth, but her foot remained wedged as though held by a giant hand. Josie was not only trapped behind the slimy rocks, she was stuck. So, what has Josie found? Is it really as fabulous as she thinks it is? Will Lupin be able to take it away from her? Will she be able to get her foot out of the crevice and get away from him? To find the answers to these questions, you'll have to read the rest of the story. Thank you.
I wrote the Rachel books. This is Rachel book 1, A Mighty Big Imagining. This is Rachel book 2, The Maybe House. This is Rachel book 3, Certificate of Freedom. This is the one I'm supposed to be talking to you about. And there's one to come, which is called An Elephant Tree Christmas next year. This is a story that has never ever been told before in fiction. It's the story of ex-slaves who, after the war, the Revolutionary War in the States, were moved by the British up into Nova Scotia and lived in horrific conditions. In book 1, A Mighty Big Imagining, Rachel and her mother and her stepfather and her baby brother live in what's called a pit cabin. A pit cabin is a hole in the ground, about the size of a grave, 3 foot deep, with a roof over the top. They spent the worst winter in living memory in that hole. In book 2, Rachel's father builds them a house. He's a carpenter. He builds them a house in the white area, which is the next town along. But the white delisted soldiers, who are jealous of the ex-slaves because the ex-slaves are taking less money for their labor, come and they pull the house down and there's a riot and they have to move back to the pit house, the pit cabin. This is the latest book. It's called Certificate of Freedom. Now, when these slaves were freed by the British, they each got a certificate of freedom. That certificate guaranteed that they would not be taken back to be slaves by the slave owners. They were then moved up to Birchtown, Nova Scotia. And Rachel and her mother one day are out picking blackberries when a soldier finds them and tells them he has to see their certificates of freedom to see if they are truly free. And Mama has that certificate of freedom. The certificates of freedom are sewn into her skirt, and she takes them out. She shows them to him. He takes them from her and says, I have to show these to my superior officer. You can guess what he does with them, and you can guess what he does with Rachel and her mama. He sells them back into slavery. That is book 3, and I hope you'll read book 4 when it comes out in about 8 months and find out what happens to Rachel in the end in Birchtown, Nova Scotia. Thank you very much.
I think you guys are really lucky tonight to get an opportunity to hear how all these authors came up with ideas for their stories. Now, as Claire told you, I often prefer animals to children, but you just have no idea what goes on in my house, and you would too. A few of my neighbors are here, and I'm sure they all understand exactly what I'm talking about. But I've always loved animals, and I like to write about them a lot. And I've always wanted to be around them. Now, my mom was very patient. By the time I was 15, I had a number of cats, and I had to make a list of a budgie, a lizard, a turtle, a fish, several fish, of course, because they drop dead real fast, a frog, a rabbit, a duck, and a squirrel. But I never did get a dog, but I have 2 now to make up for lost time. And I have 3 cats right now. But I just want to get back to the squirrel for a minute because my new book is called A Pocket Full of Fur, and one of the main characters in it is a squirrel named Woody. And when I was about, I guess, 14 years old, my dad brought a baby squirrel home in his pocket, which he had found at a construction site where his family home was being demolished. And it was an orphan squirrel, and of course I decided right away that we should keep it. And of course my mother was horrified. But I named it Chipper, and we put it in our house, and we started wrecking the house and climbing up the curtains, and like it was a free-for-all for the squirrel. And so then we put it in a cage, but it started going berserk in the cage. So it was finally time to set Chipper free after he'd wrecked our house. And I made an amazing discovery, and so did all my neighbors, when we finally set the squirrel free, because we discovered that squirrels don't adapt well to pet rules. They like to break them all. They don't really adapt to the rules of domestication. So the squirrel that I had began to wreak havoc on the neighborhood. You'd see him chasing people down the street. He would hide in bushes and trees and leap on people's heads. He was climbing up screen doors, begging for food, and everybody was terrified of this squirrel. And his big mistake that he made, Chipper, was biting a finger of a little girl who was trying to feed him a Sugar Crisp. And so they called the animal control on him and took him away. And I was absolutely devastated because I never found out what happened to Chipper. So anyway, I decided that from that idea in my life, an idea bloomed for, that episode of my life, an idea bloomed for a book. And it's called A Pocket Full of Fur, but the squirrel's named Woody in it. And it's about what happens when you try to raise a wild animal, which is never a good idea. And it has a happier ending than what happened in my real life story. And it's about trying to understand your parents too, and about making new friends. He befriends a strange old woman who helps him with his squirrel problem because there is animal control, critter ritter trying to get rid of the squirrel. And he's also very ashamed of his messy house. His house is just a disaster all the time because they have a slew of animals. And I'm not saying that's what my house is like. It is sometimes, but that's mostly because of the kids. The animals are cleaner than the kids. So anyway, I encourage you to read this book whenever you get a chance. It's A Pocket Full of Fur. Thank you.
I left all my books upstairs, but that's okay because I have a poster. And on the poster is the fifth book in the Mustang Mountain series. It's called Rodeo Horse. And in the background is a picture of a wild horse that my husband took when we were doing horse research in Wyoming. The Mustang Mountain series is a series of books about young people, 3 girls in particular, whose character develops and who grow and mature against a backdrop of the Rockies, against that wonderful, stunning mountain scenery, but also the challenges of the wilderness. And I like to write stories about human and animal characters that have to resolve the difficulties in their relationships while they're meeting the challenges of survival in the wilderness. And as they battle blizzards and lightning storms, bears and cougars, bad guys and bounty hunters, the 3 girls in my story, May, Allison, and Becky, learn and grow. In Skyhorse, the first one, they had just turned 13, and now I'm on the 8th book. It's a sort of a triple trilogy. Started as 3 books, then grew to 6, and is now 9. And my girls are turning 15. I don't like series where they all stay the same age. I like my characters to grow up. And so the 9th book will be the last because they'll be 15 and they'll be too old. They'll be too old for the sorts of adventures that I'm writing about now. As I've written these books, a very interesting thing has happened to me as a writer, and that is I've become an impassioned advocate for the wild horses that still live in Alberta. When I started writing Mustang Mountain, I didn't think we had any wild horses left. I thought all of the wild horses in North America were living in the United States. But this summer, when I was in the Rockies, I had 3 or 4 different people tell me that there are small bands on the eastern slopes of the Rockies. They are not protected by any laws. Ranchers can shoot them. People can gather them up and do whatever they want with them. They have become so adept at living in the harsh conditions of the eastern Rockies that they can run like the deer through the trees.
These are plains animals, but they are now learned to hide in the trees, and only the people who live there see them in the spring when they come down out of the trees. So when I'm finished the Mustang Mountain series, maybe I'll start advocating for some legislation in Canada to protect our wild horses, because they really are a treasure that we still have. Thanks very much.
I'll read you the first page of this. I should point out that every fact in this is accurate. What I do with that fact is another matter. It ranges from 12,000 BC to 1650 AD. People have been in Canada for that length of time. The opening bit. History can be horrible, horribly boring, especially Canadian history. Some people think Canadian history is more boring than watching water freeze. Some people think Canadian history is watching water freeze. Other people think there isn't any Canadian history. When they hear the words Canadian history, they fall over laughing the way they do when they hear airline food, or painless dentistry, or military intelligence, or Bush's brain. Oh, I just put that in. Such expressions are oxymorons. If you don't know that word, go look it up in that big book over there. It's called a dictionary. It has lots of words in it. Others say that Canadians are too polite to have any history. These people seem to think history is how many creatures you murder and how many trees you chop down. When you read this book, you'll find out that Canadians can murder creatures and chop down trees perfectly well. Thank you very much. It's just that they usually apologize first. So it goes right through from the very earliest beginnings when the first folk went after mammoths until 1651. And we come across, I have to stop. Sylvia just kicked me in the back of my leg, and so, and she's the president, so I have to sit down now. It's really quite funny. Yeah. The Vikings played a game using the severed head of an enemy as the ball. I thought that was kind of interesting.
I've got two books that really don't look like they should have anything in common, but they have a lot in common. One is called Manya's Dream, and the other is called Just Call Me Joe. One's about a real person, an amazing person, Marie Curie, and one's about a made-up boy who's 10. But what they share is immigration and being new and having difficult times. Marie Curie was Polish and went to France so she could study in university. And she was first in her class studying in a foreign language with a bunch of guys in the class, being almost the only woman. Incredibly brave, and I think she was incredibly scared at the same time. And this is about a 10-year-old boy with a situation similar to my own, except 93 years ago, who came to a new country from Russia, not speaking the language, almost alone, and had to struggle and find his place in the world. And what I discovered writing both of these that are part of me, because I grew up and came to New York as an immigrant, and I came to Canada as an immigrant, and that experience of being new, whether you're new to a country, or new to a school, or new to a city, or a block, is a very universal experience. And it was wonderful to explore it, and wonderful to see how courageous you can be, no matter how scary the situation is. So Just Call Me Joe, an Orca Young Reader, and Manya's Dream, Maple Tree Press.
Galloway, and I'm your friendly alchemist for the evening.
not to set off smoke alarms. We didn't have those in the Middle Ages. I don't know, our willpower was not up to the mark. We did something wrong. It's failed again. Oh, well. You might have been a schoolmaster. You could be the alchemist. You might be the town crier. The town crier has an even fancier costume than I have. You might be the barber surgeon. And these days, if you're a barber, you don't cut off legs, and if you're a surgeon, you don't cut off hair. But if you lived in the Middle Ages, you might very well get to do both. Martha's solution. Well, I hope you have fun with archers, alchemists, and 98 other medieval jobs you might have done. Because I want to go on from there. The very quick change. And now behold me as the Greek courtesan, the courtesan's daughter. I'm the mother, I could be the grandmother in that story. And this is my new novel. It was published in the States by Random House in 2002, and it's published this year by Penguin Canada. And I continue to be very excited about it. So if you're interested in history, and if you're not, it's a great story. And I was in a Davis Tables bookstore the other day, and the person who was selling books, and who's in the middle of the story, and it was a perfectly wonderful time to listen, she said, it's so interesting to find out about this time that was kind of different from ours, but in a lot of ways it was like ours. And this is ancient Athens in 350 BC. And they were expecting Philip of Macedon to come attacking them. And indeed that happened, but not until a little after the time of my book. Phano is involved in the political life of Athens. She's my heroine, and Neera, the stepmother, the courtesan. Phano was my stepdaughter. And I brought her up as an educated woman. Most proper Greek women were not educated. They were supposed to be housewives and good little people. But I, as a courtesan, I'm an educated woman, and I know that it's an advantage for Phano. Phano's not always sure about this. She wants to make a respectable marriage. But that becomes more of a difficulty than she quite expects. And the third book I want to share with you tonight is, again, from the Our Canadian Girl series, and you've heard a number of those tonight. And so far, I've only got book 1 out. I've been a little behind the times, but books 2 and 3 are coming along. So this is Lisa book 1 of The Land of Caribou. And this one has a family connection for me, which makes it particularly fun. My great aunt, Margaret McNaughton, married one of the Overlanders and wrote and published in 1896 a book about that epic journey across Canada. And it was a very rough time. I think 200 men and 1 family. And they joined this group outside of Fort Garry, which is now Winnipeg, and went the whole way across. And My Canadian Girl is an invented character, but the family and all the people in that story are real. There's a lot of the adventures they had, including the one where my heroine and her little brother are caught. Their raft goes over and they manage to grab onto a rock, and it's a question of whether she's going to be able to hang on until help arrives, and I guess you get to read the book and find out. But there are more about her, so you could down to see what she's got.
Can a country do whatever it wants with the river
Bringing Up Beauty, which won the Silver Birch in 1996. In Bringing Up Beauty, a 14-year-old girl fosters a black lab for Canine Vision Canada. And Canine Vision Canada said, why do you always write about the sad part? Why do you write about the sacrifice? Why don't you write about the benefit? And so I wrote a different kind of beauty. It's a little different. 14-year-old Elizabeth raises a chocolate lab, the chocolate lab that she gets at the end of this book. In one chapter, she raises the dog against the chaotic background of her family background. And in the other chapter, I become a blind person because I write from first person. So I'm Elizabeth in one chapter, and then in the flip chapter, I'm a blind person with diabetes. And I'm always extremely irritable when I write from that point of view. In fact, I'm writing the third book now, and I'm actually going to kill myself, and I shouldn't tell you that, but I will. I'll just read you a part from my crabby day. When I went out on a date with my girlfriend on my 16th birthday, and she did break off with me a little later because I'd gone blind. We ordered the house specialty from the takeout window. French fries heaped with hot brown gravy and melting white cheese. It meant a 4-dose shot of insulin before lunch and plain salad that night, but it would be worth it. Slipping my knees around the bench part of the table, first one, then the other, took an extra bit of wangling. I felt the table shift as Maddie sat down across from me. We always use a wooden fork to stab those fries and shovel them into our mouths. So I started, delicious, gooey, and smooth. The fries were long, and I kept wiping the corners of my mouth and chin so that the hot cheese wouldn't burn me or make me look like an exploding zit. That's when it happened. Maybe I'd gotten overconfident and too quick. Maybe it was the distraction of the seagulls screaming for us to throw them something. In any case, I felt the end of one fry slide right up my nostril. Thank you very much. A different kind of beauty.
I'm going to talk about 3 of the books that I had come out this year. They're all by Scholastic. I started off a series for Scholastic called the Scholastic Canadian Biographies. There's Canadian Pioneers and Canadian Greats. And these books were written at a grade 3 reading level, but what we're finding is that they're being used by in grade 4 classrooms, grade 5 classrooms, grade 6 classrooms, because there are 5 stories in each book, very concise biographies, and so it's easy for kids. They're interesting, and it's easy for kids to use material rather than the harder stuff in the library. They also came out in French at the same time. The other book that I had out with Scholastic this year came out in French. It has just come out in French. It's the first Canada to come out in French, and it was called The Lone and Untamed Land, the Piedmont biography of Hélène Saint-Onge. And it was a great adventure writing it, and I know that the kids are enjoying it, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as well.
There's 4 books in the series. The first one is called The Mystery of Ireland's Eye, and it's set in kind of a spooky place in Newfoundland, an island where there's a ghost town. The second one is set in Cobalt in northern Ontario. It's called The Secret of the Silver Mines, and it's about a very, very old crime that was committed about 90 years ago by a 100-year-old man. It has a haunted house in it and all sorts of wonderful things like that. The third one, which many people call the scariest one in the series, is called Bone Beds of the Badlands, and that one is set in Alberta. And in it, Dylan and his friends, because all of these stories are about this character by the name of Dylan Maples, Dylan and his friends are in the Badlands of Alberta, and they're looking for dinosaur fossils. And when they're there, they get this strange feeling that they're being followed by someone. And that someone is an escaped killer who is 7 feet tall, has a shaved head, and is called the Reptile. But the current book in the series is this one, Monster in the Mountains, and that's one I'm going to read a little bit from today. In that book, Dylan goes out to British Columbia. He's kind of recovering from the events that happened to him in Alberta. And I'm going to read a section that happens in the middle part of the book where Dylan has met a girl by the name of Alice, and Alice and his weird Uncle Walter Mitty have gone out into the forest to look for the Sasquatch. And just a little bit earlier on, they've seen a marmot, which is a little animal that's been ripped apart by something fierce. So It grew pitch black outside. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, then heavy breathing. As those steps neared, they slowed, as if whoever was on those feet was examining our tent. The nightmares I'd had as a kid came back to me in a rush. Monsters chased me, or came out from under my bed, or slipped out of my closet and crept up to where I was lying. They would loom over me, their eyes glowing in the dark, their claws stretched out towards me. I was frozen with fear in my sleeping bag. A shadow grew across the tent. It was huge. I could see the outline of a massive beast, standing on 2 feet, thick hair covering its outline. I smelled a sickening stench. Cosmos Green had said that Sasquatches are usually following you when you think you're following them. It had tracked us. No one would find a trace of our bodies, and if they did, it would be like the remnants of that marmot. Severed body parts, blood gathered where the bones were ripped from the skin. I saw a hand reaching out for the door of the tent. Then I saw another hand. It was Uncle Walter's, sliding down the outside of his sleeping bag. I glanced over. His eyes were wide open, and his hand was slowly making its way to the sheet he'd left on the ground beside him, the one that carried his big, gleaming machete. Thank you.
About tonight is Nobody's Child, and this is set in 1915, and it's set in Turkey, and it's at a time where it was the first genocide of the 20th century, and it's about 2 Armenian kids who are marched out to the desert to die, and it's intertwining tales of Maryam and Kavor. And Maryam is sold as a slave on the white slave market, and they have to decide, like they are saved, they do survive, but they have to decide whether to become Muslim themselves and live, or whether they should risk death again and go out to find their own family to see if anyone else lived. It's a young adult novel, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Read as Best seems to have come full circle with a book called Becoming Ruby. And I guess I have in my own mind sort of thought of this book, even before it got called Becoming Ruby, as sort of a young adult read as best, because in both books there's a lot of tension between the girl and her mother. Different girl, different mother, and a different age. Ruby, who was called Nan to start with in the early drafts of the book, is 15 years old, unlike the 3-year-old in Read as Best. And talking to Sharon Simon today about the book, she was asking about the title and the name, and I said, well, actually, you know, I didn't start out writing a book about a girl who wanted to change her name. I was just writing a book called The Taste of Cream Soda about a girl named Nan. But partway through the writing of that book, I realized that I really liked the name Ruby, and thought that maybe someday I should give a character that I was writing about that name. And then I thought, well, gee, I'm a long way from finishing this book. Why don't I change Nan's name to Ruby? So I did the search and replace thing to change her name. Didn't work. Nan was Nan. And so the name change did become an integral part of the book. And I'd just like to read part of one of the scenes in which she starts to become aware of herself as a changing person. She's at the cottage. Her family has walked down the gravel road to the store, and inside, Dad says, "Feels like a night for a pop. What's anybody think?" He lifts the heavy lid of the big metal chest. I hang my face over the chill air. Like a dive into deep water, it cools. Inside the chest, row upon row of exotic caps offer choices. Mountain Dew, cream soda, orange crush, root beer, Tahiti treat. What would you like, Nan? I think I'll have cream soda. Cream soda? Mom says it as if no one in their right mind would choose such a drink. I thought you liked orange crush. I do. I just want to try something else this time. Is there something wrong with that? After the muggy closeness of the store, the air outside feels cooler. I can feel the sweat on my back drying as I sit in the baked fat patch of grass away from the rest of my family. Now I'm
I'm going to just skip over the several paragraphs describing Ruby's or Nan's drinking the cream soda because I don't want to make you too thirsty. Dad returns the bottle for the refund, and we start back along the road. I run up a little bit ahead of my parents and sisters. I turn and announce, "I want you to call me Ruby." Mom looks as if I've just said I want to be called scab or diarrhea. Dad smiles. I've always liked that name. Gary, close enough to hear my announcement, says, "You don't want to be Nan anymore?" "No, I don't." Gary looks at me like he's trying to figure out if I'm just trying to make trouble or what. Mom hands Dad the bag of groceries and lights a cigarette. She blows out a mouthful of smoke. It's a difficult thing to change your name. I'm not changing it. I just want to be called by my other name, my first name. Well, you can't expect everyone to suddenly start calling you Ruby when they've been calling you Nan all your life. You haven't been calling me Nan all my life. You've been calling me Nanny. Ruby's pretty, April says. I wish my name was Ruby. April is pretty too, Mom says. And so is Nan. As obnoxiously as I know how, I yell, "Nan, ban, han, fan, man, pan, ran, tan, van. Nanny, banana, canny, fanny. Nan, stop it." All the rest of the way back to the cottage, I say no more about being Ruby, but behave in a way that's impossible for Mom to find fault with. I walk tall, lift my feet, don't kick at loose gravel, and I keep to the left side of the road. But my name is Ruby, and Ruby likes cream soda.
Run is historical fiction about Terry Fox. For 22 years, the Fox family refused to allow people to write the book. I convinced them to allow somebody to write it, and my next job was to convince them to let me write it. I did a whole lot of research for this book. Part of my research was interviewing the family members and Terry's best friend, Doug. They told me what was right, what was wrong with the book. Doug actually told me that he cried for the first time since Terry's funeral while reading the book. Daryl, his brother, read the book and talked about how eerie it was that words coming out of Terry's mouth that he knew he'd never said but he knew he would have said. The father at one point opened up the manuscript and said to me, "See where your character says this to my son says this back?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I said these identical words to my son, and he said these identical words back. We're alone, and I never told anybody. How did you know that?" I said, "I didn't, but I think I know your son." I interviewed family. I read everything I could find. I read every piece of video. I ran 26 miles along the Trans-Canada Highway, the same way Terry did, the same place Terry did. The book is historical fiction. Things about Doug and Terry and the Marathon of Hope are completely factually correct. I did create a character named Winston. He's 14. He's having troubles. His parents are separated. He's run away from home. He's been suspended from school. Mother asks father if he can take him for a little while, for a few days. Father's a reporter covering a nothing story but a one-legged kid trying to run across the country. My character goes with him. He gets to see Terry Brown, hears him speak, rides in the van, plays basketball with him, has lunch with him. Terry's favorite lunch, by the way, 2 cheeseburgers, plate of fries, salad, a hunk of apple pie about this big, vanilla ice cream, and a chocolate milkshake. Apparently, if you run 26 miles a day, you can eat whatever you want. The book has been up now about 2 months. One thing that's different with this book than my other books is normally I get paid to write books. This one, I donate all the royalties to the Terry Fox Foundation and Penguin Books and Maxim. This book is probably on the way this year to earning about $350,000 to the Terry Fox Foundation. So buy a lot of them. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to thank everyone who stayed as long as you did. Now we're going to have another one of these just next week, and I hope you'll turn out. No, we're very grateful for whatever affection is bestowed upon us. And if it's in your heart to buy one of our books, one of my books, then we'd be ever so grateful. You're good sports. I hope you enjoyed the evening. Good night.